The Bible records 42,000 men slaughtered in a single afternoon. Not by an enemy army, not by plague, not by an act of God, by their own brothers. All because they couldn't pronounce one word correctly. Shibboleth. That was the world, broken, bleeding, burning from the inside, when a man named Ibzan walked out of a city called Bethlehem and became the judge of an entire nation. He ruled for 7 years. He left no battles behind him, no miracles, no fire from heaven, no parted seas. What he left behind was 60 children, 30 sons, 30 daughters, and a web of alliances so calculated, so deliberate, so quietly brilliant, that historians who study ancient Near Eastern politics still cannot fully account for what this man understood about power, that every other judge around him completely missed. This is the story of Ibzan, the man history forgot, and the reason that was almost certainly by design. To understand Ibzan, you have to understand the era he was born into, because it was not just difficult, it was apocalyptic. The period of the Judges, approximately 1380 to 1050 BC. 300 years of the same catastrophic cycle. Israel would abandon God. God would allow an enemy to rise against them. Israel would cry out in suffering. God would raise up a leader, a judge, to deliver them. The judge would win. The judge would die. And Israel would immediately go back to abandoning God. Round and round for 300 years, like a nation addicted to its own destruction. By the time we reach chapter 12 of the book of Judges, Israel has just survived one of the most traumatic events in its entire history. A judge named Jephthah, a brilliant military commander, a wounded man, the son of a prostitute who was cast out by his brothers and then begged to come back when war arrived, had just won a massive victory against the Ammonites, and then made a vow to God so reckless, so catastrophically poorly worded, that it may have cost his only daughter her future. His story ends not in triumph, it ends in a civil war. 42,000 men from the tribe of Ephraim dead at the Jordan River. Killed not in open battle, but at a checkpoint, asked to say one word, Shibboleth. The Ephraimites couldn't pronounce the sh. They said Sibboleth, and they died for it. This is the Israel that Ibzan inherited, a nation that had just committed mass fratricide, a nation where tribal distrust wasn't political disagreement, it was a body count. Into this world, a man from Bethlehem walked forward and said, I'll lead. His name was Ibzan. In ancient Hebrew, the most widely accepted root meaning is gleaming, illustrious, conspicuous. In a world drowning in darkness, his name announced what he was before he spoke a word, a point of light. And then there is the city, Bethlehem. Most people hear that name and think of a manger, a star, a newborn king. But 1,000 years before that story, Bethlehem was already a city of weight and significance. Its name means house of bread, a city of provision, of grain, of agricultural abundance. And here is where it gets complicated, because there were two Bethlehems in ancient Israel. The famous one in Judah, south of Jerusalem, the city of David, the city of Ruth and Boaz. And a second one, smaller, quieter, almost forgotten, in the northern territory of Zebulun. Situated in the Jezreel Valley, one of the most strategically important trade corridors in the ancient Near East. Biblical scholars have noted something striking. When the Book of Judges refers to the southern Bethlehem, it always adds the qualifier, Bethlehem of Judah. Ibzan's Bethlehem has no qualifier, and the judge who comes directly after Ibzan, a man named Elon, is explicitly described as a Zebulunite, from the same northern region. If Ibzan was from the northern Bethlehem, he wasn't just a village elder who got lucky. He was positioned at the crossroads of ancient commerce, the Jezreel Valley, where grain caravans and military routes converged from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean coast. He wasn't just wealthy, he was strategically wealthy. And everything that follows makes a great deal more sense when you understand that. Now, let's talk about the 60 children, because this is where Ibzan stops being an interesting footnote and starts being one of the most calculated political minds in the entire Old Testament. The text says it plainly. He had 30 sons. He gave away 30 daughters in marriage outside his clan. He brought in 30 wives from outside his clan for his sons. 60 children, 60 cross-clan marriages. In the ancient Near East, marriage was not primarily romantic, it was diplomatic. Every marriage between two families created a bond of mutual obligation, a new alliance, a thread of kinship that made open conflict between those two families almost impossible. Because you don't go to war against your grandchildren's grandfather. A thread of kinship that made open conflict between those two families almost impossible. Because you don't go to war against your grandchildren's grandfather. Now do the mathematics of what Ibzan built. 30 daughters sent outward, each one into a different family, perhaps different clans, possibly different tribes. 30 wives brought inward, each one from a different family that now had a son living in Ibzan's household, eating at Ibzan's table, bound to Ibzan's name. That is 60 families across Israel who are now personally, biologically, covenantally connected to the judge of the nation. If each of those 60 marriages produced even 5 children, Ibzan had 300 grandchildren spread across the tribal landscape of Israel. Living, breathing, walking connections between clans that had, barely 6 months earlier, been slaughtering each other at a river crossing over the pronunciation of a single consonant. This was not a family man enjoying his wealth. This was a statesman, operating in the only currency that transcends politics, transcends warfare, transcends even religion: blood. And here is the detail that makes it even more remarkable. The text specifically says he sent his daughters outside his clan and brought wives from outside his clan. He didn't consolidate power by keeping everything close. He dispersed it deliberately. In a world where every powerful family hoarded its children like precious commodities, Ibzan let them go. Every single one. The Bible does not place stories side by accident. The story immediately before Ibzan is Jephthah, and the contrast between these two men is one of the most quietly devastating things in the entire book of Judges. Jephthah had one daughter, and he could not keep her. In a desperate moment before a battle, he made a vow to God. Whatever comes out of the door of my house first when I return in triumph, I will offer it to the Lord. He won the battle. He came home, and the first thing to walk out of his door was his daughter, his only child, running toward him, dancing, celebrating his victory with tambourines. The text says Jephthah tore his clothes. "You have brought me very low," he said to her. You have become the source of my trouble." He blamed her for being alive, for loving him enough to run out first. Jephthah, one daughter, lost to a reckless vow. 42,000 allies slaughtered in a civil war he started. Legacy, grief, fracture, blood in the river. Then Ibzan, 30 daughters, and instead of holding them close, instead of using them to consolidate his own family's wealth in the safe, traditional way, he sent them out, not in exile, not in punishment, but in covenant, in trust, in the radical belief that a daughter given away in peace is worth more to a nation than 1,000 sons kept home in fear. Jephthah made a vow that destroyed his family. Ibzan made 60 covenants that rebuilt his nation. The difference between those two men is not intelligence, it's not power, it's not even faith. It is this: one man led from his wounds, the other led from his wholeness. Here is the thing that nobody talks about when they talk about Ibzan. God never speaks to him. Not once. Not in a dream. Not through a burning bush. Not through an angel. Not through a still, small voice. Every major judge in this book gets a divine moment. When Gideon was called, the angel of the Lord sat under an oak tree and appeared to him. When Deborah judged Israel, the Spirit moved through her prophecy. When Samson was born, an angel announced his coming before his mother even conceived. But Ibzan, nothing. No recorded calling, no vision, no divine endorsement. Just a man from a city called House of Bread who looked at a broken nation and quietly started doing the work of putting it back together. Now, some theologians look at this silence and say the minor judges were just political leaders, wealthy men who filled a governance vacuum. Nothing supernatural here. But I want to offer a different reading. What if the silence isn't absence? What if God works just as powerfully through a man who shows up every day and makes 60 careful, deliberate, wise decisions about who his children marry, as he does through fire, earthquake, miracle? The most durable things in human history were not built in moments of spectacular divine intervention. They were built by people who understood, quietly, without applause, that the work in front of them mattered. Did it anyway. Ibzan spent 7 years quietly weaving peace into the social fabric of Israel, one marriage at a time. The text records something remarkable about the 25 years surrounding his reign. Israel had peace. Not dramatic, miraculous, parted sea peace. Just peace. The kind that happens when someone is doing the invisible work of keeping everything from falling apart. The Bible names 60 children, and then records none of their names. 60 lives, 60 stories. 60 people who were born in Bethlehem, who grew up in the house of the judge of Israel, who were raised to one day walk out that door and become someone else's family. And not one of their names survived. Think about that. Somewhere in the hills of ancient Canaan, there was a daughter, let's say the 9th born, the one who had her father's eyes and her mother's laugh, the one who was terrified on the morning she left Bethlehem for a village 3 days' walk north that she had never seen, to marry a man she had met only once. She got there. She built a life. She bore children who had the blood of Ibzan's household in their veins, and the blood of a Naphthalite family. And one day, those children played together with children from Ephraim and from Benjamin, and from families that had once stood on opposite banks of the Jordan. And they didn't even know that the reason they were at peace with each other was an old man from Bethlehem who decided 30 years earlier to let his daughters go. That is Ibzan's legacy. Not carved in stone, not shouted from a mountaintop, not recorded in the annals of great battles. Written instead in the faces of children who never never knew his name, but who lived in the peace that his wisdom made possible. The close. The Bible ends Ibzan's story the same way it begins it, quietly. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem. He died in Bethlehem. He led a nation in between. No eulogy, no mourning period described, no final words recorded. Just, he died, he was buried. The same earth that received him was the same earth that had held him since the beginning. In a book full of men who burned bright and left ash, Ibzan is the exception. He was a man who burned steadily, warmly, without spectacle, and when he was gone, there were 60 fires still burning in 60 households across the nation, because he had been careful enough, wise enough, humble enough to give his flame away before he died. 3 verses, 7 years, 60 children, one nation, however briefly, held together. That is not nothing. That is everything. There are hundreds of people like Ibzan buried inside your Bible. Men and women who changed history in 3 verses or less. If you want to know who they are, subscribe. Because the most powerful stories are always the ones that almost got lost.